Hello, Dr. Church. Thank you
Hello.
for being with me today. We're going to talk a little bit about an academic topic today, and we're going to talk a little bit about research. When looking through your publications throughout the years, you have covered a lot of topics throughout colorectal surgery, from benign disease to cancer to inflammatory bowel disease to hereditary cancer. So you really have covered anything. Why has research been so important to you since the beginning?
Um, I think it's part of my personality to think about things. Um, and you and I have talked before about um, being a thoughtful surgeon. So nobody wants to be a technician. You could train anybody to cut an appendix out, but to know why you're doing it and why you're doing it this way and why you're not doing it that way is the beginning of thoughtfulness. So evidence-based medicine is one of the ultimate expressions of that, but even that is too rigid. The human body, the human biology, the biology of disease is so amazingly varied that you cannot find out everything about it. You just can't. And you can do studies, but then there are situations outside of the studies. So you can base your operation on a description in the textbook that is in itself based on various studies and various opinions, and it's a distillation of the knowledge leading up to that stage. But then the next operation you do, it's not in the textbook. So then what do you do? And this is where you have to be able to think. And I've always thought of myself as a lateral thinker. So I think of the main things. The pastor at our church always says the main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things. But then there are the lateral things, So sure, if I do this rectal exam, I'm going to find a cancer. But what if the cancer is flat? Or what if he sneezes and I don't find it? Or what if the cancer is in the pelvis and it's not in the rectum? And what if a whole lot of different things? So you can drive yourself crazy like that. But just see, this sort of discussion is an example of lateral thinking. So you asked a pretty simple question, and then you head off into all these various side alleys. But I've always sought to find things out for myself, to find answers out for myself. So I even started out, I did my medical training, finished that, did a year, we call it house surgeon or internship in New Zealand. And then I took a year off to do a Master of Medical Science in Anatomy. And that really solidified I didn't enjoy the rat research, but I enjoyed reading papers and thinking of things, thinking of hypotheses, checking them out, testing them out, planning ways to test them out. I liked the discipline of statistics. I liked the accomplishment of doing a study and writing it up and telling people about it. I mean, I enjoy all of that.
Did you ever use yourself as a subject for research?
Yes, I told you the last time.
I was like, you like research so much, you took a biopsy of your own muscle.
I know, that was the ultimate sacrifice.
I know.
But I felt like I'd passed the test. I was a member of the club now because I was missing a bit of quads.
When you come up with like new ideas, and sometimes it's not just a new idea, it's just thinking of a topic in a different way. Like, for example, Lynch syndrome in 3 dimensions. Like, it's a really novel way to think about the disease, although the information has always been around. How do you handle critique when people judge you when you're coming up with those new ideas or new thoughts?
Um, it happens fairly often.
Mm-hmm.
The first reaction is disappointment. It's like the 5 stages of grief. It's like disappointment, upset, anger, thirst for revenge, acceptance, and then
Publication.
consigning the reviewers to like the scrap heap of stupid people that don't have your don't have your way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And a way of thinking is based, I think, on the innate qualities of your brain, but it's also shaped by knowledge and your attitudes. So um, you can just accept things the way they are, or you can think about ways of doing them differently or better. And there are a lot of people out there that just like to operate, and they like the clinical work, and they like to diagnose things, they like to fix them, and they like to send the patients home. And that's great. We need a lot of people like that. Imagine if everybody liked research. Nobody would get anything done. But there have to be, like the Imagineers in the surgical world, people that, it's like looking to the stars almost. You take reality, but then you wonder what else is there. Is there a different way of looking at it? Would that be helpful? Ultimately we want to cure cancer, we want to cure all these diseases, and we're not going to do it if people are not going to push the boundaries.
Taking all your publications out of the picture, what is your favorite paper?
Well, probably the one I tell people about most is Open Sesame.
Uh-huh.
Just because it's made such a huge difference to me. Well, I used to do it before the paper. And so the reason you write papers, or the reason I write papers, is to be helpful to other people. And ultimately then helpful to your patients. So you don't do it so that your name is there, and you don't do it so that everyone says, "Oh, did you read a paper by Church?" No, you don't. You do it because, "Oh, did you read this paper about how to do a rectal exam?" I don't care who wrote it, but this is a good idea. I'm going to try it, and that's how you should look at it. And then the other one that I'm really happy with is the Imodium and colonoscopy paper, because that, I think, has been very helpful. It makes a big difference to be able to not have sticky bile in the cecum. And I've had even gastroenterologists come up to me at meetings and say, "Wow, I read your paper about Imodium, I'm using it, and it's making a big difference." And that makes me feel happy.
And thinking about other publications or papers you've read from other people, what is your favorite publication?
See, it's hard to answer that.
It is.
I would have to think about it.
Okay, I'll get back to you. Okay, when you're thinking of a new topic or an idea, how do you take that idea from just a thought in the middle of the night on a scrappy paper or a napkin to really a manuscript? What are the stages that you think about, and what stages does it have to go through?
So the thought often just occurs randomly when you're not thinking about it. And so it's like there's a fly buzzing around, and you catch it, and then you put it in a bottle, which means writing it down. And then you look at it from up and down and inside out at your fly. Not that fly, this fly. and then you're already starting to think about how to process it. If it's a really good idea, if you think it's a really good idea, then you want someone else to give their opinion too. And so then it depends. It could be just a concept. It could be a pertinent clinical question. Those are the easiest ones because you can study them. For example, I've been involved with a study in New Zealand about colonoscopy and how to investigate symptoms. So the immediate thought is, well, what's the yield of doing colonoscopy for diarrhea and abdominal pain and constipation? And you go to the literature and you think there's not much there. Then you go to your own database and then you find something and then you write it. So that's the sort of question that came out of studying a different topic. But I like best the ones that come out of thin air. And then because that gives you can see why Edison was how he is, with literally a light bulb in his head. I love those moments.
Mm-hmm. So you thought about an idea, you put it down. How do you move from that idea from being a thought or just an abstract idea into really a practical idea? Do you talk to your chairman first if you're gonna just guide someone now through the process of really writing a paper or starting a big project? Like, what are the technical steps that you have to go through?
Um, well, you mentioned Lynch syndrome 3D. I basically did it myself with the help of the Lynch coordinator at the time. And that one really appealed to me. It still appeals to me. It still seems to me to be a very logical way of doing it. I think it's always good to look and see if anyone's done it before, because there's nothing so embarrassing as having a great idea and then you find out somebody's already thought of that idea. It's disappointing, but at least it's not embarrassing if you find it out. But if you look and nobody's thought of that before, then I usually I don't deliberately keep it to myself, but if there's somebody else interested, e.g. you, for example, I would talk it over with you. But if you're not here, then who am I going to talk to about genetics? Maybe Brandy. I don't know.
So you find really someone that can actually communicate with you about the idea that you think they're gonna add something to it or help you formalize it more and then move it forward.
Yes, so you do your literature review first,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do that once you think it's worth pursuing.
Sounds good. And let's say you have gathered your data, you put your like everything together, and you actually came up with a solid conclusion that really supports that idea. How do you write manuscripts? Like, when you put that data together, how do you start writing your manuscript? You've done your literature review in the beginning, you've talked to someone who knows about it, you came up with the data. How do you put all this into a manuscript now?
Well, there's the logistical things you have to do. So you decide which journal, and before which journal, it's who do you want to read it. And so you have your target audience, you do a journal that is read by your target audience, and in general you want to have the highest impact journal you can get. So you do that because it's going to be read more and cited more and have more exposure, and that's what you want for your idea. So it's not just, oh, I've got a publication in this journal, good on me. It's like, let's get this out there. And then you look and see how they want you to write it. So author instructions are important. Saves you a bit of time on review. And then you put it together. And then it comes down to the mechanistics of medical writing, which is important.
Do you mind giving me or whoever's listening to you or interested a couple of advices on the mechanistics of medical writing? Like, how do you really do that? How do you navigate it?
So a manuscript has a structure. It has the abstract, the introduction. The introduction is essentially presenting the question or the issue. So in an introduction, you put out, this is basically what's done now. This is a gap, which I've identified, or a question that has raised itself to me. And I have this hypothesis about how to fill this gap or answer the question. And so this is why I'm doing the study. So it's really essentially a justification for doing the study. So you wouldn't write, there's already been 3,000 papers on how to do a right colectomy, and I've got another one. People are going to say, so what? What a waste of time. So you think about that when you're designing your study. So the introduction and justification, the methods are to allow someone else to come and repeat your study pretty much exactly. So you describe it the way that somebody would want it if they wanted to repeat it. And then the results are the results. If there's one important quality of a medical manuscript, it's precision. So you don't want to say give the results in text and then give them in a table and then give them in a graph and then rehash them in the discussion and then tell them in the conclusion. So that's 5 times you've mentioned the results. So it's stupid and nobody's going to like that. So you just give the results one way. So if it's quite complicated, a table is good. There's not much role for diagrams, but graphs are good, like Kaplan-Meier curves, etc., in the results. And you just refer to those without repeating the data. And then you're on to the discussion. So the beginning of the discussion kind of reiterates in narrative form what you found. So in this study, we found this, and that. Then you have a discussion of the implications of your finding and how important it was. And then you put your finding in the context of the world literature. And then you discuss the limitations. And then finally you discuss a little bit about going forward. We can do more studies, what are the questions that our results have raised, and then you conclude with a kind of practical application of what you found. And then basically you're done.
Sometimes there are certain ideas that are not really well explained in a manuscript alone, so then people come up with like the idea of writing a small booklet or a textbook about it. What ideas are worth deciding that, or you personally decide that, okay, I'm going to write a book about this?
Well, a manuscript really deals with one idea, basically. There may be like some sub-ideas of it. A book is required when there are multiple ideas. They can be related ideas. So, for example, syndromes of hereditary colon cancer. You could write a manuscript on that if you had a broad overview of it. So, for example, what is the death rate from hereditary colorectal cancer? That would be about death rate. It wouldn't necessarily be about all the different syndromes. But if you're writing a textbook on the syndromes, you have to have a chapter for FAP, a chapter for Lynch, a chapter for all the others. So it's a multi-topic presentation. And if it's one idea that's a long idea, and it's not really a study, but just a description. So, for example, the history of the Weiss Center. That's not a study, but it's something to read. So you would turn it into a brochure or a monograph. A monograph's a good way to describe it, and present it like that.
If you had an idea that let's say for example, you wanted to write a primer on hereditary colon cancer or how to start a registry and take care of those patients, and you just said that's worth writing a book about, or I have the experience that people can replicate what I do, how do you go forward with that? Do you talk to like a book company, or like how do you logistically move forward with that concept?
Yes, you can do a proposal. Sometimes the publishers will ask you to do it if you're on their radar, but more often I think you decide to do a book yourself. So then the first, you want to know what you're going to write the book about, and from the publisher's point of view, if it's a commercial publication, that is, if you're going to charge money for it, there has to be a need for it. And it can't replicate anything that was recently published, for the same reason that that when you're conceiving research, you don't do the 200th paper on exactly the same topic, because nobody's going to want to read it, and you're not adding anything to the world knowledge. So you look for a gap, and if somebody has done something on hereditary colon cancer before, you take a different approach, like the clinical aspects of the genetics of hereditary colon cancer, or somebody else might have done the surgery of inherited colon cancer, or somebody might have done the endoscopy of inherited. Somebody might have done them all, but not in as much depth. So you choose a different aspect of it, and then you can write the book. So then you put together your chapters, and a little summary of what's going to be in every chapter. You decide whether you can do it all yourself or whether you need help. So it could be a multi-authored book that you're the editor of, or it could be one or two others and you take 4 chapters each or something. Or you do it yourself. One of the good things about doing it yourself is it's uniform reading, so it could be uniformly great or uniformly bad, but it's uniform, so it kind of reads a bit like a novel in a way, you know. But I don't like textbooks where this chapter is like this and this chapter is different and worse, and it doesn't flow. But so a textbook is really like an encyclopedia. So you choose, I want to find out about pilonidal sinus, so I go and I look up that chapter. It's not like you're not going to read the textbook from cover to cover, but you might read hereditary colon cancer textbook from cover to cover.
How do you pick your authors? If you're the associate editor for this book, how do you pick your authors?
It depends. So usually for a commercial book, you want authoritative work. Nobody's going to want to read about what the old grandma up the road has to say about anal warts. You know, you want somebody who's written papers on it, who's an acknowledged expert, and who's a good writer. So that's why really good books are not very common, because what tends to happen is people get their buddies to do it, and the buddies get their residents to do it, and then you get people that are just regurgitating what they read in the previous textbook or what they've read in various papers, and there's no original thought to it. So what I really like are people who have thought about the topic and have something to offer. So textbooks are supposed to set the standard. They are supposed to show you the current practice in every area of topic that they're written on. But I like to take them beyond that and to give the reader of the textbook something that they don't get from reading like the last 10 manuscripts in PubMed. You get a comprehensive treatment of the subject, but then you also get an imaginative treatment.
Once you've done your author list, everyone has written their chapter and they've emailed you their chapters. How do you edit those chapters, being the associate editor of the book?
Well, the toughest job is to get them to send the bloody chapters in on time.
Well, usually it's always after deadline.
Yeah, well, there's usually several deadlines. So the first deadline is just a fun deadline.
That's the reminder that you should start working on the book.
Well, no, that's a reminder that you should even start thinking about it. And then after 6 months, you get another deadline, and then another deadline. And then people start to get angry. But so yes, and that goes into your selection of authors. So if you've someone to write a chapter before and they've been really, really late, then that's it. You know, you don't ask them again. Mm-hmm. And it's up to the editor to give quite detailed instructions to his contributors what he expects from them. And so he'll set the tone of the book by those instructions. So I want 1,000 references on anal fissures. I want you to deal with every possible presentation and discuss the pros and cons of every described treatment for anal fissures. So this is going to be the beginning and end, the Bible of anal fissures in your chapter. And you have 2 pages. So, but that's how you sort of set it up with the author. And then if the author's worth his salt, he'll pay attention to you. But clearly it's not going to be perfect. So you get the chapter in. There are copy editors to correct grammar, but I like to do that as well. I can't help but altering the grammar and style to fit what I think is right.
Is there other copy editors that will fix the style and the language, or they'll just fix pure grammar?
No, they tend to fix style and grammar. It varies. You know, there are copy editors for journals and copy editors for textbooks. I like to imagine them sitting there and reading my paper and saying, "Oh, No changes. Yes, the tick. Remember when you
A plus.
did English in high school? Yes. But I've always liked writing,
Hmm.
always, and I think I do it okay. And there's a lot of bad medical writers out there.
I think it's an art. I mean, I write a lot and I try to read to learn from it, but I still think I have like ways to go. But it's different because when I send it to you and you change it, then I'm like, okay, it's still the concept, but if flow's different, it's easier to read now. It's more pleasurable to read, and clearly it's an art.
A lot of people get writer's block, so it's like, all right, today I'm going to write this chapter. And they sit down, and you know what you see in these movies, they're scrinkling up the paper and throwing it over, and the floor is covered with paper, and they've got nothing. So, you have to start, and quite often my first paragraph, I'm going to redo that later. But I think it helps. In medical writing, it's easier because you can put down headings. So, for the hereditary colon cancer textbook, I always put down a definition first. So this is what the chapter's about. I'm defining it. There's an introduction. So the importance of the chapter and what's going to be in it in general, how we're going to cover it. And then you start off with a genotype, and then a phenotype, and then presentation, which includes history, physical, and then investigations, and then it comes down to medical therapy and surgical therapy. The investigations include upper GI, lower GI endoscopy, and then it may be a bit about the future, and then you bring it all together as a summary. So if you give your chapter a structure or your article a structure, and even like the introduction to an article can have a structure, then it helps you. And it helps you get started because you just fill in the gaps.
All right, so for those fellows that are going to be at the Cleveland Clinic in 2040, and they have like an interest in a certain topic, they've written multiple manuscripts about it now, they've written clearly a couple of book chapters and a book, and now they're asked to give a talk.
Yeah.
How do you give a talk?
It's a bit the same as writing a book. So it depends on how long the talk is and what's the context. So if you're lucky, it's going to be a keynote lecture. So then this is serious stuff, because generally it's a plenary session. Everybody's going to be there. You get a time limit, which you cannot go over. And that is just so important. You have to leave a little bit of time for the sort of polite thanks and the odd joke, like I just flew in from New Zealand and boy, my arm's tired type joke. But then make sure you don't go over time. And then look at your topic, and you know something about it, otherwise you wouldn't be asked. And I don't believe in giving canned talks, especially for keynote lectures or visiting professor lectures. That has to be something original. That's what people want from you. You have to give the latest thing in this topic, whatever it is. So make sure you're really up to date with the literature before you even put it together, because it's a bit frustrating to put a talk together and then find out, oh, I missed this key paper that just came out last week. And then you have to go back in and change it. And then it's the same structure as sort of introducing the topic. So introduction, explanation, definition, so people know what you're talking about. And then there'll be a series of ideas. So most talks are about a series of ideas. So in a 7-minute presentation, you may have 1 or 2 ideas, and you can't fit any more than that in. If you have 4 ideas in 7 minutes, choose the 2 best and delete the rest. For half an hour, maybe you can have 3 or 4. You can't give them like meat for 25 minutes of that lecture because people get really bored and switch off. So there will be some highlights, and the way I like to design it is it's like climbing a mountain range. So You start off sort of low key in the introduction, then you're building up to the first really important point, like talk about fistulas. What's the first important point in fistulas? Find the right opening. So fistulas arise from the crypt, blah, 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 and then they have an abscess, then they keep draining, and the patients don't like it, and then where do the fistulas come from, and what's the key to repair is to find the right internal opening and fix it. And that's my first mountain point. And then you come down from that. So now the ceton's in and the patient's getting more comfortable, the track is simplifying, you're getting rid of the extensions, you're getting rid of the abscesses, and then you bring them back for the repair. The repair is the second mountain point. And then the third mountain point might be a recurrence. And then you discuss the outcomes, and then you give them your tips, and that's what they want from you. So my own, I assume you're going to be an expert at it. So if your success rate with fistula repair is like 30%, nobody's going to ask you to talk about your methods unless they want a comedy show. But if your success rate is like 86%, they're going to want to know how you got that 86%. And so a video would be nice, a detailed description so that they can do it. And then you come down to your summary and conclude in a sort of matey way that makes people smile.
So our field is like, it has a lot of science in it, and especially if you're talking about genetics and hereditary cancer. I mean, sometimes for people that are half interested, it could be a really boring topic. How do you manage to keep the audience engaged, and how do you balance presenting slides that are purely scientific that have deep intron leaks like yesterday and data and numbers where even we're interested and we're like, okay, I can't handle this anymore, and then just keeping it like simple and just putting more pictures than like, how do you balance both giving a real idea, a scientific one, versus keeping the audience engaged?
Yeah, so this is where you need to know your audience. So and a typical room of colorectal surgeons
Don't want to know about deep intron leaks.
they're not going to want to know
like
about
leak.
in fact, if they knew you were going to talk about that, they would probably go find something else to do. Or these days, they're all on their phones.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sign. If you look down at the audience and you see everybody, then you know you've lost them.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing is that the average sort of attention span of someone in the audience is 12 minutes. So I've heard some people say that you should tell a joke every 12 minutes. And I wouldn't do that, but you should give them a break every 12 minutes. And I think how I approach the complicated things is you try and make it uncomplicated. You try and, like a picture tells 1,000 words type thing. And I've been heavy on cartoons my entire career because when I'm talking genetics, I know it's tough. And it was tough for me to learn it. And you translate the detailed biologic information into a concept. People can understand concepts. So APC, for example, they don't really want to know it's a key gene in the wingless pathway that degrades beta-catenin and stops it getting into the nucleus. It's a gatekeeper.
I know.
And there it is. The APC is really a key gene because it's a gatekeeper to cell growth. And it's going to stop the cells growing when they shouldn't and let them grow when they should. But then the gatekeeper is asleep on the job and the cells start to grow when they shouldn't. And then you get a polyp. So people can understand that, but they can't understand the wingless pathway. Why is it called wingless? It's called that because it was named for the Drosophila flies in the early genetics experiments. Like SMAD is small mothers. I don't know what the AD is for, but it relates to small mothers.
I'm glad someone knows what those things. Okay, so you balance it between pictures and between giving them scientific data. How do you highlight the most important conclusion? Like, do you go to the scientific conclusion, or do you go to an advice? Do you support it by data, or do you say, this is my personal experience? Like, how do you end your talk usually? Because usually there's really a certain message you want them to get from it.
There is, and this one of the biggest mistakes in research presentations is to confuse the summary with the conclusions. Everybody puts the summary of their results in the conclusions, which is wrong. So you should have those two things. So you summarize what you found, and then the conclusions is what you derive from what you found. So we found that Australians have the worst leak rate after low anterior resection. That's the summary. The conclusion is never let an Australian operate on rectal cancer. That's the conclusion. I take all that back.
Just for example.
Australians are very good surgeons in general. But
Okay.
you can understand the difference. And the more conclusions you give, the weaker they are. It's like you have, this is your impact, this box. If you divide it up 10 times, each one's only going to have a tenth of the impact. If you have one, like 2 Imodium with the colonoscopy prep, gives you a significantly clearer cecum. That's my summary. The implication is, or the conclusion is, use 2 tablets of Imodium with your colonoscopy bowel preps.
What is your advice for young clinicians or surgeons, especially that are interested in research in general or have an academic interest? How should they navigate their career from the beginning of training?
Well, I think if you have any control about who your mentors are, you should try and get to be with surgeon scientists. And every big academic institution will have some, and they will have different in the focus they have in terms of research. Some will be clinical, some will be basic science, but you should spend your time with them. You may learn surgical technique from other non-researching surgeons, but and they'll be valuable, but they're not going to help your passion, which is going to be to sort of direct your career in that research direction. Then, as a result of that, it's not bad to spend time in the lab and see if you like it. And there are quite a few opportunities to do that. So lab research is good. It's not my cup of tea, but it's lots of people's cups of tea, and it's good. I don't decry it at all. You need to make sure you're well schooled in the basics of research, so study design and statistics are really important. So when you're writing a research paper, you should be able to do your own descriptive statistics and your basic comparative statistics as well. You may not, you should be able to do an analysis of variance. That would be about the most, but you should be able to do the routine t-tests, chi-square, and decide which tests to use, parametric, non-parametric, etc., and interpret them. You should be able to. You may want to do a statistics course if you're really interested, especially in epidemiology or the advanced sort of genetic statistics. And then it depends what area you want to go into. The earlier you can decide where your interest lies, the better, because then you can shape your course along those lines. So if it is epidemiology, then the earlier you get into that, and it'll shape the way you do your residencies and what fellowships you choose. And then you're looking for 2 or 3 years in the lab at some stage, or doing research. I think that's useful because it gives you the solid base of a CV that makes you more attractive later on. And I know when we choose clinical fellows in colorectal surgery, one of the first things we do is go to their CV and look and see how much they're published, how many talks they've given, who they've worked with, what they're interested in. And if it's a match for us, then we're even more interested in. So that's useful. It's time well spent. If you just want to go into the wilds of Idaho and do colorectal surgery, then forget all this. But if you want to have a career as a surgical researcher or scientist, then this is what you should do. And then when I started practice myself, I knew what I was interested in, but I wanted to keep a record of my surgeries and my colonoscopies and my outcomes. So I just started databases from day one and kept them going for at least 25 years. And so that's given me all sorts of opportunities to work with data that I know the quality of because I entered it myself. And to be able to get fellows involved in helping me do that, it's been a huge boon.